our WASEC February meeting, and thank you, Heather, for that. And so I've got a couple sort of introductory slides here before we get going into our presenters as we get into the technical pieces of where we are with water supply here at the end of February. We are recording now, and I just want to say again, we are going to be recording the presentation portion of today's meeting, and then but not the discussion time. So feel free to be open with our discussion time if folks want to, and then we'll be posting the recording on our Ecology YouTube page and emailing that out to folks who couldn't make it afterward. And if you don't want to have the possibility of your face showing up in the recording, feel free to turn your video off. And here's our agenda for the next 2 hours together. I'm going to do a quick kind of reminder of where we are with our drought processes and our existing drought declaration again. And then I'll pass it over to Karen, and Nick Bond is here as well from the Washington State Climatologist Office. And then we will have Amy Burke from the Northwest River Forecast Center on water supply forecasts, and Matt Warburton from the National Resource Conservation Service on mountain conditions, and then Nick Suffin from the U.S. Geological Survey on stream flow and groundwater, and then Chris Lynch from the Borough of Reclamation on the Yakima Project current conditions. And I do know that for the Yakima Project, their next big update is March 4th, coming next week. So that we'll have a sort of a where we are now update based on that. But I know we won't have the full update yet until next week. And as I wanted to have time for a little more time for our presentations and discussions this month, so we will have a quick 5-minute break before we go into our discussions. And I will note for folks, we've got 2 discussion questions here this month. We will go back around to our technical presenters, technical committee members on this question of, has the hydrologic threshold for drought conditions been met or is forecasted to be met for additional geographic areas, and that's beyond our existing drought declaration area? And I will review what that means in terms of those different parts of that question here in just a moment. And then we'll have a second discussion time for everyone who's attending to share about sort of what conditions and water supply concerns are you all seeing on the ground. And again, with our WASAC committee role, this is a really important committee in terms of helping to advise ecology on current and forecasted water supply conditions. And when it looks like it's time to look at this question, whether this hydrologic drought threshold has been met or is likely to be met in the forecasts. And again, today's objectives that share that information and discuss this specific question around, has that hydraulic threshold been met for additional geographic areas? And I'll come back to what those additional areas are looking like beyond our existing threshold in just a moment. And for a quick review for folks who don't live deep in the drought world all the time, when we talk about drought conditions, there are 2 requirements within our statute and rule. And the first is this hydrologic threshold, which refers to an area that is receiving or is projected to receive less than 75% of normal water supply. And again, that normal refers to the last 30 years of data, which right now is 1991 to 2020. And then the second part of that, of our drought definition statutorily, is a hardship threshold, where water users in the environment are expected to experience undue hardship as a result of the current drought and current water supply conditions. I wanted to highlight those 2 pieces of that drought definition, but importantly for today is just this first part, that hydrologic threshold, as this committee is focused on that question. There is a separate committee called EWEC, which, when this hydrologic threshold is met, convenes to look at that hardship question. But again, this WASAC committee is just looking at that first threshold. And then in terms of our existing drought declaration status, just a quick reminder here, I know we looked at this last month, but last July, Ecology declared drought in 12 watersheds in parts of 12 counties. And Heather will drop this link into the chat now for folks that want to look at it on their own screen. And then while this is currently in effect until June 30th of this year, depending on conditions and going through our drought declaration process, this can be potentially expanded into additional geographic areas in the state, and that could potentially involve statewide, depending on conditions, and again, that second hardship threshold as well. and that could potentially be expanded past this June 30th date. And so just to set the scene a little bit before I pass it off to our presenters, just want to sort of highlight two visuals. I think visuals also tell a big story. While we are right now getting some snow in the mountains, and that's really great for the ski resorts, and there's a lot of advertisement excitement on ski resort social media, we still have a huge deficit in our snowpack across most of our mountain ranges. This is an image I thought was really telling on February 2nd of the Hurricane Ridge webcam from Olympic National Park. And while yesterday there was some snow, still extremely low for this time of year for Hurricane Ridge. And right now, some of the data is saying that with our existing snowpack deficit, even if we had above normal precipitation for snowfall, the basins would still have a below normal SWE or snow water equivalent going into April and looking into spring and summer months. So we're still very much expecting to have water that is not coming at the times of year which people are going to need it, and are looking at these questions going forward. And so with that, I'm going to stop at sharing my screen and pass it off to our presenters. And I'm going to have Heather share screen for Karen and Nick.
Great, thanks, Heather. My name's Karen Bumbacco. I'll dive right in. I think you have to go back one slide. Yeah, here we go. All right, so the caveat here is the maps on the upper part of the slide are showing conditions through February 24th, but then the stats that are listed in the bullet points are only through the full month of January, since clearly we're at the very end of February, and those February numbers won't come out till next week. But regardless, looking across the state of Washington for the water year, so going back to October, we've been on the warmer side, even when we take into consideration that really cold part of January that we had last month. And just October through January ties as the 18th warmest start to the water year on record. Those records go back all the way to 1895. What was interesting about one of the years that it ties with, it's actually tying with water year 2005, which some of you might remember was a year in which temperatures were running warm and we had a low snowpack by April, because we were seeing more of that snowfall as rain rather than snow in our mountains. So we're just at the same temperatures that we had in 2005 through the end of January. On the right-hand side, that's our precipitation percent of normal from October 1 through the end of February. And it's averaged at about 92% of normal. I expect that average to drop down a little bit once the February numbers are in there, because February's been on the drier side through most of Western Washington has seen the drier conditions, though. When you look around the state, there is some variability in terms of where we've had drier versus wetter conditions for the water year. Next slide, please. So this is just the recap of January. Remember that December was very, very warm. December was the third warmest on record for Washington. And then we switched to have this colder period in January, a really completely different atmospheric circulation to cause that change in temperatures. And average statewide, January was the 62nd coldest, so nothing too notable in terms of the long-term record, with those cold anomalies definitely more evident in Eastern Washington. That's January precipitation there shown on the right-hand side. It was actually near normal if you averaged it across the state, although it tricks my eye when I look at that map because I see a lot more green. But those dry periods those dry areas brought down that average a bit, and it was just at 103% of normal for January. Go ahead to the next slide, please. This is looking at February so far, a couple days at the end of January there, snuck in there for the last 30 days. And we're back to seeing really warm temperatures compared to normal. Some of those temperature anomalies are exceeding 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit above normal for the month so far. So pretty warm temperatures for midwinter. And then we've been on the dry side too. So really almost the entire state, except for the northeastern part where there's some near normal to above normal precipitation, we've been anywhere between 50 to 90% of normal for February. Next slide, please. So this is looking at the drought monitor. There, I think, was maybe a little bit more improvement than I would have liked to see due to those January rains. So this looks a little better than the last time we met. But the remaining drought is representing the below normal snowpack in the mountains there. And I expect that if that remains to be the case, we could see some worsening on the drought monitor. Next slide, and I think I'm handing it off to Nick now.
Yeah, thanks. And apologies I couldn't make it in our last meeting, but starting off with the deep dive into the ocean. We still have El Nino. Look at those warmer than normal temperatures along in the equatorial Pacific. And what I'm a little bit concerned about is the warmer waters relative to seasonal norms along our coast here. And nothing like it was in 2015, but definitely on the warm side. Next slide. In terms of where the tropical Pacific is going, we're in El Nino conditions, and still the warm water, but not for too long. The models have a pretty strong consensus of cooling there. Look at that, the different model results in the lower right chart. And getting into moderate, weak to moderate La Nina territory in the seasons ahead. And that's summarized in the probability plot in the upper left, that by the end of summer, that it looks like La Nina is more likely than not. This is something that we tend to see about 2/3 to 3/4 of the time. El Nino has the seeds of its own destruction in it. And so it's, while multiple years in a row of La Nina are common, and if we did have a La Nina winter next winter, it would be 4 out of the last 5 winters that have had those conditions. That does have precedent, and that's happened a few times before in the last 50, 70 years. All right, next slide. Karen mentioned, and we probably all remember, the very cold weather that we had in the middle of January. That the circulation pattern associated with it is shown in the right, the slightly larger figure, I think it is. And with these are 500 millibar height anomalies with that low over the central US, indicating anomalous northerly flow into the Pacific Northwest and some very cold weather, especially for the current climate. That contrasts with the earlier part of the winter in the upper left in just the last month or so at the lower left, which is more of an El Nino pattern. In the former case, the low was a little bit northwest of where it usually is, and then the latter case a little bit southeast of where it was, but you put it together and that's what we see during El Nino. And so this that temporary break from it was not usual, but something that was actually the potential was anticipated months ago due to other parts of the climate system. And so what I'm particularly interested in is how we can exploit some of that information to get a little bit better handle on subseasonal variations. But let's go ahead to the next slide and look what the models are showing for the season ahead. Here I'm using the International Multi-Model Ensemble. Again, a 500 millibar height anomalies at the top, the air temperature and precipitation anomalies at the bottom and the left and right, respectively. Screening messages, high heights and warmer than normal temperatures expected for the March through May period. Not much of a signal in precipitation, but that's that's not really too surprising. And for what it's worth, especially if you look at precipitation anomalies in the amounts, because there tends to be a drier time of year. Rarely does a signal emerge there, but even what I did here with this plot is the probability of it being above or below median really doesn't emerge there either. All that being said, though, the temperature anomalies on the order of 1 to 2 degrees C, that's significant for a 3-month average. All right, go to the next slide. This is a little bit out of order, but just looking ahead to summer and what's happening to our ocean, that those blue colors in the tropical Pacific indicate the La Nina that seems to be on its way, but continued warm temperatures off the coast of the Pacific Northwest with our prevailing winds from the west, that predisposes us toward a normal then warmer than normal temperatures, and this is for the period of June through August. But before we get there, if we go to the next slide, and in particular from a water perspective, let's go back to March through May, and again, look at multi-model ensembles. This is the North American ensemble, and what they're showing as a group is a little bit different than the international ensemble on the dry side. But if you look at the thumbnails at the lower part, it's mostly due to a couple, 3 of the models being quite dry, while the rest are not that much different from normal. So I would say that there's a lot of uncertainty about our precipitation in the spring. And there's no guarantee by any means that it's going to be extremely dry, but there's that potential certainly always. And one of the models, the NCAR model, is going that way. All right, next slide. The official forecast out of the Climate Prediction Center, again, the March through May, warmer than normal, fairly high confidence there. A little bit lesser confidence of below normal precipitation, especially east of the Cascade Crest. And I think one more slide is just our summary. Yeah, as just to recap what Karen was saying, above normal temperatures for the water year as a whole so far, normal to below normal precipitation for a majority of Washington. The one place that's been on the wet side, the Columbia Basin. Some of the statewide averages are skewed by places that are normally wet, how much they're wetter or drier than normal will disproportionately impact the state averages. For the most part, this winter has played out like past El Niños, with that break in the middle of January, and certainly the reprieve we're having right now. And but that being said, especially by the time we get into the second week of March or so, it looks like it's going to be on the warm and perhaps on the dry side. If we get through this winter, maybe we'll be in better shape, in that I think there's a good chance that once again we'll have La Nina, and that seems to be a continuing refrain. So with that, I'll close, and if you have questions, fire away.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Got a couple of minutes here. Does anyone have a sort of immediate sort of content questions for Nick or Karen? All right, well, thank you both.
And one thing,
Go ahead.
I was just going to add that in terms of this transition to El Nino to La Nina, and this is a question that comes up, certainly the media asks all the time. The ENSO doesn't seem to have too great an impact on our summer conditions. And so I'm not sure we can really use that so much as more just what the models are showing and just what we've seen in past summers overall in the last couple of decades, which have tended to be on the warm, dry side. And so those both the kind of recent trends and what the models are suggesting, you have to go with especially a warm summer summer, and you know, maybe good for the tomatoes in your home garden, but maybe not for some of the water supplies for irrigators. So.
Well, thank you, Nick. Appreciate that extra piece. And we'll come back later in the meeting to talk more about what some of these pieces may mean looking forward. I appreciate all of these details. And with that, I'll pass it off to Amy.
Okay, thank you. So that's my contact information there if you have any questions about our water supply forecasts. But I would also encourage you to reach out to Brent Bauer, who is your service hydrologist for Washington and is also on this call. Next slide, please. So here I'm showing the runoff since the beginning of the water year on the left-hand graphic. So we're just looking at the volume of water flowing through these forecast points since October 1, expressed as a percent normal. So we see some yellows and oranges indicating below normal runoff amounts. But there are some greens, even some blues sprinkled in there, indicating normal to above normal amounts. And I'm showing that alongside the forecasts on the right-hand side. So these are the forecasted volumes expected to flow through these points from April through September. So a little bit more of an optimistic picture there. And I'll just say right off the bat, Brent and I were both noticing yesterday that these seem a little optimistic. But those greens there in the western half of the state are indicating roughly normal runoff for that April through September period. Next slide. I'm showing the same forecast values for the same April through September period on the left-hand side, expressed as a percent normal. And then on the right-hand side, I'm showing those same forecasts expressed as a percentile. Sometimes forecast points that don't vary very much over years. If you look at their percentiles, you can see some lower values pop out more. So those points that are in red are indicating let's see, I think it's the lowest 20th and below percentiles. So that means they're, the 20th lowest if you were to normalize the data into 100 years. So we're expecting exceptionally low runoff April through September in a lot of those basins that are coming off the east side of the Cascade. So the Okanagan, the Methow, the Yakima has some reds in there. The Palouse, I believe, has some reds. The Skagit has reds, as well as some of our points on the Olympic Peninsula. So even though our percent normal forecasts aren't looking particularly low, I would encourage folks to look at the percentiles this year. Next slide. This is a lot of the same information that Karen went over. I always like to look at our numbers when she's showing hers, and mostly they're telling the same story here. So those top 3 maps are showing the monthly precipitation for the last 3 months. I believe Karen said that it's totaling with her climate toolbox numbers to be 90% of normal for the entire water year. That graphic I'm showing on the far right there. I will say that our graphic is kind of highlighting that orange blob in northern Washington. That's the Okanagan. Kind of bleeding down a little bit further from that too, as having lower than normal precipitation since the beginning of the water year, October 1st. And then again, I think Karen did a great job of highlighting the temperatures, which I'm showing across the bottom. So I will gloss over those. Next slide. I did want to touch upon snowpack. I'm sure Matt will cover this extensively, but we are, for the most part, looking at below normal snowpack numbers. And again, in some cases, quite low there on the Olympic Peninsula. Next slide. Here, I'm just showing some key runoff at some of the key water supply points around the state and the change since we last met on January 23rd. So we saw a lot of increases for the most part in runoff. I think that's mostly owing to the fact that the precipitation is falling more as rain than snow, resulting in it running out the rivers and not accumulating as snowpack in the mountains. So this is likely driving the soil, the modeled soil moisture states in our model up, but not increasing the snowpack. Next slide. I'm showing the water supply forecast for the April through September period for these same key water supply points around the state. We're seeing no changes there in the Skagit or the Dungeness, but if you look over there at the Okanagan, we've seen a big decrease there in the forecast since last we met. Increase in the Chehalis, although I will say that the Chehalis has pretty poor skill since it's a mostly rain-driven basin. And then we're seeing decreases there at the Methow, Yakima, and Walla Walla in the eastern half of the state. Next slide. I wanted to show the 10 days of precipitation forecasts currently going into our ESP10 forecasts, which are the forecasts I'm showing. The left-hand graphic is showing the inches of precipitation expected to fall in the next 10 days. This includes tomorrow, which is the big day. The middle graphic is showing that same information as a deviation from climatology. So that nice green swath across the western half of the state is indicating up to 3 inches more than normal precipitation in the next 10 days. And then that far right-hand graphic is showing the same information as a percent normal. So it kind of highlights the eastern half of the state as not getting as much as normal in the next 10 days. So basically, west side's supposed to get this dump that's coming, again, mostly tomorrow. On the next slide, and you can move ahead, Heather. Thank you. I'm showing this information, but it's broken down by day and also including temperature. Apologies, there's a lot on this graphic, but I mostly want to draw your attention to the left-hand block of maps. That far left-hand column is showing the inches expected to fall, inches of precipitation expected to fall in the next 5 days. So we're starting at the top with day 1. That's today. Tomorrow, leap day, is the big day. You can see that big red blob across the western portion of our domain. And then on the far right-hand side, we're seeing those black snow line elevation maps. So when those maps turn black, that indicates cold conditions and that we're expecting the snow levels to drop all the way to valley floors there. So if you look at the bottom right-hand graphic there of the left-hand block of maps, we see black all over the domain. So essentially what I'm seeing here is cold coming in, but tomorrow, which is the biggest day in terms of precipitation, if you move all the way to the right-hand side, you see that the snow line that's kind of the warmest day of these whole 10 days. So I think a lot is going to depend on tomorrow. We are certainly staffed up here at the River Forecast Center with flooding concerns. So if tomorrow comes in, we know it's going to come in with heavy precipitation. If it comes in a little bit warmer than we have forecast, we could see more flooding and less improvement of snowpack. If it comes in cold, we could see hopefully no flooding and improved water supply forecasts because that building snowpack. So this is a great example of one storm making some difference. Maybe we'll see how this pans out after tomorrow. And also leap day seeming to often bring in these big events. Next slide. I just have some takeaways here that I will end on. So water year 2024 has been generally warmer than normal. Precipitation has been normal, maybe a little bit below normal. This has meant that snowpacks are well below normal at this point. Runoff since October 1st is mostly below normal, although it's improved a little bit since last month. The water supply forecasts are a mix of normal to below normal. Keep an eye on those percentiles, which show low forecasts in some places. And the next 10 days are expected to bring more than normal precipitation, especially to Western Washington, hopefully paired with cold temperatures. That's all I've got, and I'll take any questions, or if Brent has anything to add. I believe he's on the call.
This is Chris Lynch. I have a question. So when I'm looking at those maps, I have today being the really wet day and not as wet tomorrow. And those are the maps I loaded this morning. Is that shifted or?
No, it's not shifted. It's that I was showing the graphics harvested yesterday, so to speak.
Oh, okay, good.
So today's day 1 is tomorrow. It's either way, it's still the 29th.
Well,
And
okay, so mine, I guess I'm a little confused then on what I'm seeing. Because it says Wednesday on the header and it has the big red blobs for day 1 QPF. And it says Wednesday.
Yeah, so that's issued.
29.
Yeah,
That's
it's
weird.
confusing. It's
Yeah,
it's
it says
issued.
Wednesday, but it does say the 29th. So I
Yeah,
was
so it's,
going by Wednesday.
I know
Okay.
it's super confusing. It's issued Wednesday and it's day 1. So day 1 is tomorrow. It's not easy. Sorry about that.
So,
And you are
well,
right. If you note that actually, because I was showing yesterday's forecast,
1200 Z.
yeah, if you look at today's forecast, you see actually some purple on that map, and you see it a little bit more isolated. So that, that QPF, that precipitation forecast is definitely evolving right now.
Well, the
Okay.
the other thing to keep in mind is that it's the hydrologic day, and that's 4 in the morning to 4 in the morning. So it started 4 this morning throughout today and tonight, and ends 4 on the 29th. So it's I mean, it ends on the 29th, but essentially most of the hours are during Wednesday. 4
Yeah, that's
a.m.
what I thought. That's the way I was thinking because it's 1200 Z.
Right.
That's a good point.
Ending tomorrow morning. So most of it should fall today. I mean, well, unless it's between midnight and 4 a.m.
Yeah,
Okay.
good point.
Okay, thanks. I just needed to get that squared away. Thank you.
Yeah, that is an important detail because we are only getting one big day. We're not getting two. I mean, I guess tomorrow, Thursday is still supposed to be pretty heavy, but not a lot in Washington. So it's happening right now. Whatever's happening is happening right now.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I got it straight now.
And so, Amy, it sounds like what's happening is happening right now. And then in terms of like the final impacts after that event, we'll see those impacts more tomorrow.
Yeah, and even over the course of the next few days as things either flow out the rivers or stay in the mountains as snowpack. Fingers
Okay.
crossed for the last one.
Yes. Thank you for that clarification. We do have a little more time for questions. I will say, Nick just let me know at the start of this meeting that he got called to some very last minute field work, so we won't be able to join. So if there are any other sort of substance or content questions for Amy or Brent, people want to ask right now, you're welcome to.
I guess one other thing I talked about, and Amy touched on this, but and we've just been talking about what, the higher the normal precip that's in the forecast. The water supply forecasts take into the first 10 days and then of the forecast. So all that stuff that Amy was showing, and then goes on to use various climatological inputs over the last however many years are in the models. So what happens in the first 10 days on any given water supply forecast can, particularly if it's anomalous like it is right now, can affect the look of the end water supply. And sometimes I don't know how to quantify it, but it, at least anecdotally, sometimes it looks like maybe it's impacting it more than it otherwise would expect, because it's just one. Well, it's actually a stormy period. It's going to be rain and snow for, this may be the biggest, but it's going to continue for about 4 or 5 days, at least in our area in Washington. So because the River Forecast Center also has on their website a way to plot the forecast without the 10 days, the explicit 10-day forecast in rainfall. And you can see the water supply forecasts are lower by about, at least I was just looking at one site because that's all I had time to do here. It was 4% lower. So instead of being up in the lower 80s, it was in the upper 70s on the Skagit. Was the one I did, Skagit at Concrete. And so there are, if you want to kind of tease apart some of the influence of different parts of what's going into the forecast, that's one place to go play around and see what that is, because it's a little bit hard when you're happen to be using right on the cusp of a big event or lack of any event. You know, it does have some influence on forecast coming out that day.
Cool. Thank you for that, Brent. Amy,
That's
any
a good.
other-
Oh, I just wanted to say that, Brent, as you were talking, I was poking around our map to see if that 4% difference that you were seeing was consistent, and it does look pretty consistent. So if you don't want to consider the next 10 days of precipitation coming in, you should take off 4 or 5% of our forecasts, our ESP10 forecast. Or you can look at the ESP0 forecast, which doesn't have any of the 10 days forecast in it. That's all.
Awesome. Thank you both, Amy and Brent. Okay, and so we'll come back to some of the implications here later on in the meeting. I want to jump to Matt now, as I know he's got some other time constraints. Matt, are you able to share your slides, or do you want us to do that for you?
Hey, let's see how it goes.
Okay, thank you.
Let's share my whole screen here. And it's on presentation mode, so let me know if you can see it.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, if at any point the slides are lagging behind me talking, also let me know and we can switch it up. Just a quick warning, you might hear some background noise. I am on a boat today. I thought I would be one with the water while giving this presentation. So hopefully it's you can hear me clearly.
Yes.
All right. Starting off with this title slide, just an image showing forecasted water vapor transport into, I guess that is for today. And as Amy noted in her talk about the forecasts, we are supposed to receive pretty significant snow accumulation in the mountains, less so east of the Cascades, but nonetheless a pretty significant storm that will hopefully boost some snowpack values across western portions of Washington. All right, first getting into snowpack conditions. Showing first the change in snow water equivalent over the past few days from February 23rd through February 28th. We can see pretty significant sort of increases in snow water equivalent throughout much of the Cascades, less so as we go east of the Cascades and on the Olympic Peninsula. Not a lot of gain in snow water equivalent, but the recent storm earlier this week provided up to 2.5 feet of snow in the northern Cascades and up to nearly 2 feet of snow in the southern Cascades. But of course, not enough to improve, significantly improve snowpack deficits. Taking a look now, looks like the title is a bit cut off, but snow water equivalent, the snowpack profile for the whole state. Statewide, snowpack is 64% of normal. Last meeting, it was 74% of normal. So we had some degradation of snowpack despite some recent gains. The percent median peak snowpack, we're at about 51%. That's not at all where you'd hope to be this time of year, with only 36 days out from the historical, or I should say, normal median peak. So a lot of catching up to do. Will this next storm provide enough snowpack to boost that number significantly? I'm a bit pessimistic, but hopefully we see some improvements there. Snowpack percentile statewide is 8. So the state is in a snow drought. Of course, some areas in the state are not in a snow drought. Now taking a look at snowpack as percent median for Washington basins on the left, and then looks like it's showing average and not median, but still gives a general picture of snowpack conditions across the broader Pacific Northwest on the map on the right there. But first, let's talk about Washington, of course, specifically. Can note extremely low snowpack conditions across much of the state. Most sites are below to well below normal, with only 2 sites really near normal, or 3 sites in Washington that are near normal in terms of snow water equivalent. Taking a look at the broader Pacific Northwest, and this is fairly consistent with strong El Nino patterns historically, where we see lower snowpack and generally warmer conditions across much of the Cascades, and of course crossing over into Idaho and Montana. And looking specifically at Washington, this has been a consistent trend throughout this season so far, where snowpack has just been extremely poor. And there's even been snowpack degradation, notably in the southern Cascades, where we were seeing quite a few sites with near to above normal snowpack, and now those sites are below to well below normal. So snowpack conditions extremely poor across the state. Now looking at snow water equivalent site map showing percentiles referencing the normal period. This gives us an idea of snow drought conditions across the state. Most of our sites are indicating snow drought conditions from extreme snow drought to more moderate snow drought. And pretty persistent low snowpack conditions, again, in the Olympic Peninsula and North Cascades, but we're starting to see poorer conditions compared to last month across the central and southern Cascades as well, in addition to extending out into eastern Oregon towards the Washington-Idaho border. And this just shows the ranking of SWE at snow-tell sites. So 1 would be the lowest snowpack on record, and higher numbers, of course, would be further away from that. But we can see that a lot of sites are ranking in the top 10 for lowest snowpack on record. And most notably, sites in the Northern Cascades as well in the Olympic Peninsula are ranking around 2 to 3. So not great. Snowpack is near record lows across that region and other areas in the state as well. Now taking a look at precipitation. First looking at water year-to-date precipitation, showing the basin site map on the left, and then the seasonal profile on the right. Last meeting, water year-to-date precipitation was 87% of normal. Today it's 89% of normal. So not really much improvement there across much of the state. Water year-to-date precipitation is moderately below normal, with some near normal conditions in the southern parts of the state. Month-to-date precipitation, so far, February has been fairly dry across much of the state, with the exception of a few snow-tell sites near or east of the Okanagan, where monthly precipitation is near to above normal, and a few sites that are just south of Wenatchee with monthly precipitation there near to above normal as well. But across much of the Cascades and notably that eastern portion of the northern Cascades and on the Olympic Peninsula, month-to-date precipitation is quite poor and below 50% of normal. And I'm going to skip over this. I forgot to delete that slide from last presentation. We have a couple minutes here to quickly brush over moisture conditions at snowtail sites. First, looking at the northern Cascades at the Rainy Pass and Beaver Pass snowtail sites. Soil moisture conditions at both of those sites are trending more below normal. At Beaver Pass, soil moisture conditions are setting a record low there. Going out to the Olympic Peninsula, the Bucking Horse Snowtail site, that arrow should be pointing to the site that's just below the one it is pointing at. But soil moisture conditions there are near to above normal. And Burton Mountain Snowtail site, just northwest of Mount Rainier, is trending below normal, and that's been the case throughout much of the season so far. And now taking a look at some sites in eastern Washington. First, taking a look at the Salmon Meadows Snowtail site here. Soil moisture is trending almost near normal, but has been slightly below normal for the past couple months now. At the Moses Mountain Snowtail site, soil moisture conditions there are doing quite well, breaching record highs above normal. And at the Ragged Mountain Snowtail site on the Washington-Idaho border, again, soil moisture conditions there are doing quite well. Sourdough Gulch Snowtail site in the Northern Blues, soil moisture conditions have been trending near normal with a recent increase to above normal soil moisture conditions there. And this is just comparing those sort of point data to the NASA GRACE-based root zone soil moisture product, showing drier, mostly drier conditions in the northern central Cascades and in parts of eastern Oregon as well, and some wetter conditions, soil moisture conditions in southern Washington. All right, and I'm about at my time, but let me quickly brush over.
Matt, feel free to take extra time if you want.
All right, appreciate it. The February 1st forecasts, you know, we're at the end of February now, and our March 1st forecast will be out next week. But these are generally similar to some of the forecasts Amy showed, with some near normal stream flow predicted for the summer period along the western Cascades. Again, you know, agreeing with Amy that these seem to be a bit optimistic, and lower forecasted stream flow in the northern Cascades out into eastern Washington and also on the Olympic Peninsula. And these values, we should see some adjustments and more, I guess, model reactivity to conditions as model skill improves for this next round of forecast on March 1st. And I have a link to where the report will be on the Washington Snow Survey webpage on this slide as well. And Amy already went over the forecast, so I'm not really going to brush over that too much. I'll just show this slide. Again, showing water vapor transport, and this is for tomorrow, with most of the snow accumulation occurring tonight into tomorrow, and with some additional accumulation throughout the weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And Matt, both yourself and Amy, I'd be curious to hear, before you go, Matt, in terms of the numbers that you say might be optimistic, even with the coming storm. Can you tell me more about that comment and your thoughts there?
Yeah, and I'll quickly just touch on it. Amy's more the forecasting expert, so I'll let her delve into that. But generally, the forecast points along the western Washington Cascades, at least ours, have fairly low skill, especially in January, March, meaning current conditions are a poor predictor for summer water supply. And that's in part because these are fairly rain-dominated watersheds along the western portions of the Cascades in Washington. And so generally with those types of watersheds, model skill tends to be a bit lower. Thus, those values tend to be closer to hydroclimatic norms. So won't stray too far from that 100 to 90% range early in the season. But as skill improves, we should start to see some deviation away from that norm. However, again, those models are still fairly low skilled compared to more snowpack dominated watersheds.
Cool. Thank you. Amy, is there anything more you would like to add to that from your perspective?
I think it's interesting because our forecasts don't always agree with the NRCS. In this case, we seem to be in agreement. And I think I would also agree with basically everything Matt just said about, watersheds being rain dominated versus snow dominated. I would also add that we are forecasting a range of forecasts. What I'm showing on the maps is the 50% exceedance value of that range. So I would encourage folks to look at the entire range this year. And if you can, you might want to hedge your bets towards some of the lower forecasts. I'd also ask Brent if he has anything to add.
Yeah, I certainly agree with all what both of you have said. One other thing to consider is, the forecasts do look at what's happened in the past. And, at the end of February, there's still a couple months of potential really good snow accumulation time. And what has happened in the past is we've had times where February didn't look so good and we had even a really big March or a really big April. Even sometimes in May, that's pretty rare, but it has happened. So those are all built into kind of the possibilities into this. And so I think you're right. It's not trying to stray too far from what has happened, either in a normal accumulation time frame or one that has a big bump at the end. But we've also seen a number of springs, especially recently, that have been particularly warm and particularly dry. And if you saw, you just looked at the outlooks, and in an El Nino, and given the Climate Prediction Center's look at drier and warmer than normal, greater odds for those, it's not a very good setup to have one of those miracle marches. I can't rule it out, but it's certainly not something you would expect, and certainly not what the climate models are predicting either. So it seems like it's unlikely, but not impossible. So I think so that's why I term it as being optimistic, is because I think maybe relying too much on an outcome through the last part of the accumulation period that's less likely than normal to happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Brent. And just so folks all have it together, I'm going to, and for the sake of the conversation, I'm going to pull up that slide again that shows that Climate Prediction Center piece that Brent was just referencing, just so everyone is on the same page. And then we'll move to Chris for his presentation. So just so everyone knows here, I think this is the graphic that Brent was just referencing that shows the current Climate Prediction Center predictions for above normal temperatures for our region. And that is that 60 to 70% probability. And then leaning towards below normal precipitation for the spring of March through May. So I just want to highlight this was that graphic being referenced there. Great. Any other questions for Matt before we move on to Chris's sort of where we are status update with Yakima? All right. Well, thank you very much, Matt, for jumping on a while from a boat. That is very impressive. Chris, do you want to share your screen, or would you like us to share for you?
Yeah, go ahead and share. Okay, so you can, what I'm going to do is skip the snow graphs, since Matt covered it well. So you can go forward. Oh, I just want to qualify, we are going to have our March water supply meeting this coming Monday, March 4th at 1:30 in the afternoon. This presentation doesn't really update the forecast. I'm still going off of the February forecast. So yeah, I just want to make sure people know that. Go ahead. To the next slide. Yes, this is the, oops, yep, the Yakima Airport slide showing conditions in the valley, and temperatures were near normal to above normal much of the month, and precip has been, well, it was actually since late January we've been above average on our precip. We had a couple of decent storms early in the month, and it's been the apparent the perception over here is that, you know, it's been kind of gray and wet most of the month. So to be behind on snow and rain in the mountains is kind of counterintuitive to people's perceptions here in the valley. Go ahead. Yeah, so this is the precip at our 5 reservoir sites, and I tried to include the QPF and take that into account to give us the October through February, as well as the the February. Anyway, you don't see what the February amount is, but anyway, we are below average for the water year. And if you'll bear with me for 1 second, I didn't realize the February number didn't show up on the graph. So I'm just gonna go to my okay. Yeah, February, well, it should come in around 80% of normal for the month of February. Next slide. We're going to skip that one. Skip. Okay. This is showing the flows in, for the water year. The green line, of course, is the current water year's flows, and the black is average. October through February runoff is close to 480,000 acre feet into our reservoirs. That's what system unregulated flow volume means. It's the amount of water that has flowed into our 5 reservoirs, and that's 82% of average. Next. And our reservoirs themselves are pretty far below average. By the end of the month, we should be around 403,000 acre feet, although we have changing conditions going on, so trying to hit a moving target right now. But that's 64% of average and only 38% full. So we are well behind. If you can see, the green line is well below the black line, which is average. Next. And our meteorologists already went over this, so you can go to the next one. This is the next 3 months long range forecast. So you can go to the next. Yeah, there we go. So this was our February forecast based on February 1st conditions. And you can see the composite blue numbers in bold are the percents of normal for the different subbasins. And let me go to the left. The blue letters indicate the subbasins. So PARW is the Yakima River near Parker. So that's our main basin where we do our water supply forecast. Everything above that. And then those others are subbasins within PAR basin, or the main supply basin. So Ketchilas Reservoir, Cochise Reservoir, Cle Elum Reservoir, and Bumping, they're all in the 90% range. As of earlier this month, I do expect a deterioration of that, especially prior to this snow event that we're getting now. We were definitely expecting it to deteriorate, and we will see how it pans out. So we will still expect a deterioration, but not as bad as it might have been without this current snow event and wet. Just a word on skill that Brent and Amy were talking about. One of the things that these forecasts, whether they're statistical or extended stream flow prediction types, they sort of tend toward the central value when you're running them in January and February. So they strongly, well, they're going to be kind of optimistic because of the tendency to go toward the median values in the months ahead. So I think that's part of the issue. But as we move along, and we don't get the precip in like February, like we didn't get normal, the forecast will deteriorate. If that makes sense to you all. Okay, next slide. This is a bit much to take in, but without being there to explain it to you all. But you're seeing the 5 different reservoir basins with the headers KEE, KAC, Cle Elum, Bumping, and Rimrock. Okay, the bars, the nice bright blue bar is the full capacity of that particular reservoir, and the green was the current contents as of February 1st, and the red indicates the forecast that was adopted for that subbasin, and the amount of times that red bar can fit into the space between the green, top of the green, and the top of the bright blue one is the refill ratio. So it gives you an idea of the health of the water supply in that subbasin. And so Ketchilas is 1.32, not too bad, but Cochise is only near 0.7. Cle Elum close to 1.3 as well, like Ketchilas. And then Bumping, of course, is a very small reservoir, so it looks a lot better at almost 10, and Rimrock is at 2. So Bumping and Rimrock, of course, will have a much better chance of filling. The upper Yakimas, Ketchilas, Cochise, and Cle Elum are not expected to fill, although it's possible depending on future conditions. And next slide. Okay, this is I think I'll just skip this slide for now. And this was a summary from mid-month. Basically, the storage is low. We have gone from third lowest, the very bottom 3 to now we're at the 6th. So we're at the bottom 6 instead of the bottom 3. So that's a slight improvement for reservoir storage. The precip to date has not been great, although January and December were better than earlier in the fall and in February. Okay. Yeah, the current forecasts are 90% range, but we expect that to deteriorate for the March 1st forecast. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Chris. Does anyone have any content questions for Chris? Great. Well, thank you, Chris.